Hi. Nice to be with you again. Pull up a chair, or if you're like me, settle back in your bed chair and pour yourself a brew. I thought I could talk a little bit about the history of carp and carp fishing. Now, if you go down to any local lake today, you'll see guys with camouflage tents, high-tech bite alarms that beep like spaceships, and enough gear to launch a small expedition. But it wasn't always like that. Carp fishing has a long, strange history, from being amongst dinner to becoming the most popular sport in the country. In some cultures, the carp is a mainstream diet. And go into most fishmongers, and you might see a carp ready to be cooked. Which brings me on to the beginning of the carp's history today. The early days. Dinner, not sport. Let's wind the clock way back, about 800 years. Carp aren't actually from around here. They were brought over from Europe in the Middle Ages. Back then, they weren't sport. They were groceries. The monks couldn't pop round to Tesco. They were the ones who really got things going. The monks lived in monasteries and had to follow strict rules about not eating meat on certain days. Their solution? Stew ponds. They dig these big pools and fill them with carp, because these fish are tough as old boots. They can live in muddy, low-oxygen water where other fish would just give up. For hundreds of years, if you were looking at a carp, you weren't thinking about a trophy photo, you were thinking about one thing. The mystery of the uncatchable fish. Fast forward to the 1800s and early 1900s. People started to stop eating them as much, and carp began to just live. They grew big, they grew old, and they grew very, very smart. Anglers back then used to think carp were impossible to catch. They'd see these massive, dark shadows moving under the lily pads and think they were some kind of water monster. Most fishing gear back then was made of cane and silk line, pretty fragile stuff. If a big carp hooked on, it would usually just smash the rod to pieces and disappear. Carp became known as the intelligent fish, the ones that were too clever for humans. 1952, the game changer. Then came a man named Richard Walker. If carp fishing has a godfather, it's him. In 1952, at a tiny place called Redmire Pool, he did something that changed everything. He didn't just use whatever gear was in the shop. He built his own rod, the famous Mark IV, and used a big bit of bread crust. He ended up landing a carp that weighed 44 pounds. That might not sound like a lot compared to today's giants, but back then, it was like catching a unicorn. He named the fish Clarissa, and she was so big she ended up living in the London Zoo aquarium for years. That one fish proved to everyone, yes, they can be caught, and yes, they are massive. Fast forwards to the 70s and 80s, the hair revolution. Things stayed pretty quiet until the late 70s. This is when the modern era really kicked off. Two guys, Kevin Nash and Fred Wilton, started looking at bait differently. Before this, you just stuck a worm or some bread on a hook. But carp are picky. They'd feel the hook, spit it out, and swim off. Then came the hair rig. It's the simplest idea in the world. You don't put the bait on the hook. You tie it to a little piece of line hanging below the hook. The carp sucks in the bait, thinks it's safe, and when it tries to spit it out, the hook catches. Well, that's what's supposed to happen. Suddenly, catch rates went through the roof. This was also the birth of the boilie, those hard, round, smelly baits we use today. They were boiled, so the little fish couldn't peck them away, leaving them sitting there for the next carp to come along. Today, the modern scene. Now, here we are today. Carp fishing is a billion-pound industry. We've got underwater cameras, GPS boats that drop our bait, and carp that weigh over 100 pounds in some parts of Europe. Even with all that tech, the soul of it hasn't changed. Whether it's a monk in the 1300s looking for a meal, Richard Walker in his tweed jacket, or you sitting by the lake this weekend, it's all about the same thing, the mystery of what's happening under the surface. There's nothing quite like that moment when the sun is coming up, the mist is on the water, and your alarm suddenly screams into life. That's the magic. And the fight is what keeps me going back to the lake. So enjoy your time sitting, looking, wondering, thinking what's under the surface, just like the monk in the 1300s. So think about your part of the continuing legacy of the carp fishing. Until next time, tight lines.